I'm very glad we're together here today because I want to talk with you a bit about dying. Dying is the last thing all of us do on earth. We die. And then we leave the planet. We leave our bodies behind, and we go on. So it's the last thing you do with your physical body. Some people say that it's the worst thing that you do, or the scariest, or the saddest. But what I've been caused to know is that it is neither the worst nor the scariest, nor is it the saddest thing that we do. In fact, difficult as it may be to believe or to hold it that way, it is the most glorious thing that we do. It is the moment of our highest joy. It is our grandest celebration. It is our biggest victory. And sometimes I'm almost afraid to talk about it in those terms for fear that someone will go there and say, well, if that's the case, I'm out of here, like my friend over here. So let me not paint a picture of death that is so enticing that you decide to end your life in this particular moment, in this particular incarnation, in this your present body. Because you came here for a particular purpose with a specific intent that your premature or early departure would truncate, would cut off, would, in a sense, spoil. On the other hand, it's important to know that in the long run, nothing can spoil anything. Spoiling something is not possible in God's universe. It's kind of like we were talking yesterday about the scientist who understands that a spoiled experiment is really nothing more than a huge step forward toward a larger understanding. So in that sense, nothing's been spoiled, and there is no such thing as failure. But most people hold death as the ultimate failure. I mean, it's the end of their life, and we even call it, in certain cases, heart failure. He died of heart failure. Or system failure. The only person who could not hold the experience of death as a failure would be a person who's died and come back to talk about it. But even some of those have come back to say things that are a bit scary. I have had a couple of out-of-body experiences, which are not the same as near-death experiences, and I don't pretend that they are. So I've never had a near-death experience. But I've had a couple of out-of-body experiences which were very, very important to me. I want to say very, very real to me. I don't think I imagined them or made them up. These are things that have happened. But beyond those out-of-body experiences, which brought me huge understanding and enormous insight, but beyond those experiences, I've also had the conversations with God experience. And I'm not altogether sure that I didn't open myself up at some level to the conversations with God experience out of the out-of-body experiences that I had, which preceded them. I think that something popped open. There was some sensitivity that I was able to access, and it's kind of like once you walk through that door, you can't go back out again. You just, that much more sensitive to the ether, to the essence, to the force, which is with you always. And so you suddenly begin opening to a larger reality. It seems to me, in my experience at least, that's how it's been. But through a combination of my out-of-body experiences and what has been revealed to me in my conversations with God, I have come to know that death is not the ultimate failure, but of course, the ultimate victory. It's just the other side of that coin. And it is the last thing we should fear. I want to say that I was blessed, and I think not coincidentally, not accidentally, by a mother who had no fear of death. In fact, she used to say to me all through her life, not just when she took ill later in life, but all through her life, she used to say to me, "Dance on my grave." I can recall being a young child, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you know how young kids are when you're talking to mommy, and I had a wonderful relationship with my mother, and with my father too, for that matter, even though he did beat me. But my relationship with my mother was particularly close, and I can recall I was 7 or 8 or 9, somewhere in there, a young boy, and I was crying one night, one evening, while I was lying in bed with her. I was just kind of sharing the mattress with her one night, and she was telling me stories, bedtime stories or whatever. I think she had crawled in beside me for a bit. And I was kind of crying, and she said, "Why are you crying, sweetheart?" And I said, "I was just thinking," and I was old enough to start putting things together. I was 8 or 9. Just thinking how sad it would be the day you die. Everybody has to die, don't they, Mommy? And she said, "Yes, I think so." And I said, "Oh, I wish you'd never had to die." I can recall saying to my mother, "I wish you never had to die, Mommy." And she said, she was just an incredibly sweet lady, my mother was. I guess all of us have that feeling about our mother, unless we don't. But she said to me, "Oh, sweetheart, when I die, I'm going to go to a wonderful place, and I want you to promise me that you'll dance on my grave." And at the age of 8 or 9, whatever I was, I had such a hard time thinking about dancing on my mother's grave. But I had the good fortune of being with my mother just before she died. I wasn't there as she passed, but I was there just moments before. And I believe I was the last member of the family to see her alive. She was extremely weak. She knew she was dying. I knew she was dying. We all knew she was dying. And the priest, as I mentioned once before, I come from a Roman Catholic family, and so the priest had been called in to administer what was then called extreme unction. These days, I think it's called the final sacrament or whatever. The last, well, not, the last rites, the final sacrament, whatever they call it. But it's called extreme unction in those days. And the priest who had come into the hospital was the youngest priest I'd ever seen in my life. He had to be about 19 or 22 or something, just one of the early graduates from the seminary, got through fast track. Because I don't think the guy had shaved yet, I really don't, he had peach fuzz on his face. Sweet young kid. And he came in rushing over from the church. They'd called him, my father called him, said, "Could you send a priest over? My wife's dying." And they said, "Yeah, right away." And here came in this kid rushing, and and he had his little bag of sacramental instruments, and he was very nervous, very nervous. And I said, and in fact, he was so nervous, it was really obvious that he was a bit nervous. And I said, "Father, are you okay?" And he said, "Yes, but this is the first time I've ever done this." I said, "Oh, well, sweet." So he went in and spent some time with my mom. And about 25 minutes later, he came out, and he was completely and utterly becalmed. Just looked like a guy of about 47 who had just understood everything. And my father and I could not help but notice the change in this guy's countenance. I mean, he was just an utterly different person. He walked out of there. So, of course, I said, what happened? First of all, how's Mom? Is she still alive? Is she okay? Yes, your mother's doing fine. She's hanging in there. She's doing fine. She's comfortable. I said, oh, wow, because, I was kind of a little nervous. You walked out of there so peaceful. I thought maybe she had passed and there's just a moment of peacefulness there. He said, no, she's very much alive. But I can tell you why I feel the way you see me feeling. I said, why? He said, well, there was the presence of God in that room. And I said, well, Father, thank you very much for helping my mother experience that. And the priest said, no, your mother helped me experience that. She saw how nervous I was. Getting the stuff out and the oils to anoint her feet and so forth. And I was nervous and I kind of spilled the oil in and your mother said, Father, don't be nervous. There's no wrong way to do this. This is not even necessary, she said. This is just a ritual. I'm already in the arms of God, I know that.